Vigil was a good idea, and an idea which materialized originally through people who were prepared to work voluntarily. It was also a flawed idea. Our original successes were pretty spectacular, and we found ourselves collecting intelligence of a really high caliber simply by networking and putting some professional volunteers together alongside some amateurs as well. It was soon after 7/7 when there was a real will, both politically and amongst the general public, to get to the bottom of the problem of extreme Islamism in Britain. There was a place for Vigil back then which wouldn't exist so much today in a Britain where the Quilliams, DCLG, CSC, PET and others exist tackling the Islamist extremism issue in their own valid ways, often with government money and most often with an interconnected will. People forget that Vigil was directed at the conveyor belts to terrorism like Al-Majroon and Hizb ut-Tahrir. We were never trying to sniff out Al-Qaeda operatives or attempt any security services work, which would have been ridiculous given our budget and British legal parameters. I think the problems started to come when word got out that we were doing well. We were a victim of our own success, really. This was partly my fault by introducing political connections who were working alongside the media as their daily oxygen, which exposed us more than we needed to be, and partly a lack of controlled expansion of the network, which started operating in different time zones and becoming a full-time organization. Soon we outgrew our budget, and many of us were working full-time on collating data whilst holding down other careers simultaneously. My fears were confirmed that Vigil was a flawed idea in late 2006, after our Hizb ut-Tahrir infiltration was the #1 story on the evening news, and by then we had attracted people with another agenda. For example, I remember that night, just before the news, a policeman I knew called me and said his team had been ordered back to Scotland Yard from their homes to face the ire of their commissioner, because someone from Vigil had briefed the BBC that they thought the Blair government and the police were not doing enough to curb Islamic extremism in Britain. That wasn't Vigil policy ever. We always thought the police needed more resources, but we were never there to comment as a group in such a public place as the BBC, just collect and pass on intelligence. That individual who briefed the BBC without the permission of Vigil members was Michael Starkey, the De Montfort University lecturer who is the most divisive crank you will ever meet. If he can drop a name, he will drop a name, and he thinks he is always right. Starkey wanted his moment because he'd never had such a moment. Introduce flaky people, and one's organisation soon shakes and stumbles over itself. I was privately furious with Starkey and simply apologised to the policeman, saying I'd try to keep Vigil's renegade factions in line, which eventually proved impossible. Starkey had his own agenda and was a loose cannon who saw Vigil as his last chance to achieve something for the first time in his life. There were others. I was forever fighting to keep them away from the valuable bits of the network. Yes, I'd use smoke and mirrors, and yes, I was more loyal to the professional members than the amateur cranks. With the BBC success, suddenly I could see bigger flaws opening up. People in the wings like Starkey and Glenn Genvey started asking for large sums of money. There were demands for an intelligence database, acquiring police notebook software, things we didn't really need at all. And this dreadful Ilham Franson crone came along, the one who took Vigil, then me, to an industrial tribunal for £15,000 or so, even though she produced a few A4 sides of translation in the whole time she was connected with Vigil. The money grabbers soon started showing their true colours, and I realised we should never have gone public or political at all. By the end of November 2006, we were operating out of a flat, and finances were buggered. By the end of that year, in spite of our successes, we'd simply run out of cash. We were doing interviews with Reuters, BBC, CNN and the like, and we couldn't even afford to pay the rent. So the major problem with a successful idea like Vigil is keeping it small and manageable. In retrospect, we should never have agreed to work with the media. We should have restricted ourselves to professional, voluntary membership, people prepared to keep their mouths shut, and we should have just rejected those like Starkey, who triggered red flags in background sweeps. We should have simply produced intelligence and given it to the police. Period. Then we'd still be quietly doing our bit for the country today and building on our success rather than being set up now in loosely connected groups of friends working on the same problem, but less effectively than we were as a whole. Then and now I feel like the professionals within the organisation were upset by allowing amateurs like Starkey to work with us. I was always told to ditch them, but I let the Blighton Brigade, as we called them, have too free a rein. We should have just barred them, and not allowed them to bring their personality flaws near our organisation, nor their greed, nor their famous five mentality, to what was at one point a network functioning brilliantly well, collecting really valuable intelligence and information which was really useful to the authorities. There are plenty of bitter little commentators who've achieved nothing in their lives. I look back with some pride on my Vigil days, and yet I recognise that Vigil started with good intentions, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The Vigil lesson is a good one for those who want to set up private intelligence networks, keep them small, keep them private, and attract volunteers, not paid employees. Make sure there are no media, no politics, and avoid people with their own agendas. If someone triggers a red flag, cut out the cancer before it strikes. So at the end of the day, mea culpa. Vigil could have been structured and conceived better. Though we had some real tangible success, I should have bottled that success rather than allowing the network to self-promote and get involved with fantasists and cranks who simply crave publicity and money to prop up their own flawed existences. Do I regret Vigil or what its current members are doing? I'm a bit older now. On the one hand, no. On the other hand, yes.